Clubhouse.
Welcome back to our Day 3 coverage of the 14th season of ATX Television Festival. This is Paul.
This is Caroline.
And this is Mike.
Well, let's see. On Day 3...
We're all tired. We're all full of barbecue. Texas King of the Hill barbecue.
Saturday, May 31st, 2025. My day started with a panel called the Showrunner State of the Union. This was my only panel that I had at the Hyatt. So it's my one experience walking up the stairs. And it was enough.
Yeah. It's a good cardio. Good cardio for those stairs.
This panel was attended by a man named Hank Steinberg, who is currently running Doc, but he has been around since a show called Without a Trace in the early 2000s. Saladin Patterson, who is currently running King of the Hill, and Ramala Mohammed, who is running a show called Reasonable Doubt, and this was her first show.
They would go out and have a panel actually later on that I didn't get to because we were doing Gilded Age, but about how they use music to help set the tone for their show, which I was super into. And I hope that they maybe put that on their YouTube channel at some point, ATX, because I would actually like to watch that panel. Because that's interesting. It's like our showrunner, like literally listening to music to set the tone for like how they go about filming their shots and stuff. And
ATX usually does, but they don't rush to get all the content out.
I feel like it was like 9 months since something like posted. Like,
hey, y'all, I don't think we can say much. sometimes once our finales are done,
Fair
right,
enough.
we have a really rough time putting those babies
I mean,
out.
what I'm saying is I like that they age it like fine wine.
Exactly. Okay, so the idea of the State of the Union with showrunners, I think, is fascinating because it gives us as the audience members an opportunity to hear what's going on in the industry. And like, you know, true like State of the Union address that the president gives, it gives you a little snapshot of like where we are right now this time. So where are we, Paul? What did they say?
The theme was uncertainty.
Ugh,
Great.
I hate that. It makes my belly hurt.
Grateful to be working, but they have gotten caught in a new business model that they didn't come up in and now have to deal with, where they are very far removed from decision makers and their job has taken on more responsibilities than it used to.
Okay.
And a showrunner had a lot of responsibility, and they feel like they're doing more than they used to.
Okay. All right.
Did they talk about at all, because this feels like it's come up a lot with us, is like with Beth, is like working overseas or like where jobs are, not necessarily are there jobs, but where jobs are, or where like they're going to find jobs.
They did say that they would prefer if things ran out of Los Angeles and they would like things to come back to Los Angeles. They did not have the insight on what's going to fix that. They don't mind Vancouver, but Vancouver can't stand in for everywhere, even though it kind of does.
Yeah, they try.
It's funny because I feel like the conversation they're having in the panel is exactly the conversation we had at lunch afterwards, where I kept saying like, but explain it to me, but explain what's going on with TV. Like, it seems like there's a lot going on with TV, but like as audience members, it's really hard to wrap our brains around because it is so much in the technical creation and development of a show and how like they get financed and all that stuff. Like, that is not stuff that most of us think about. We think about like maybe casting or location or whatever, but not how does this all get made financially and decisions be made?
That's part of what makes a showrunner is that they're usually writers that learn the financial part that a lot of writers aren't capable of taking on. And these are the people that were able to do that.
We had a really great episode with Beth Kushnick over on Hollywood to Your Home where we actually spoke to an accountant who explained to us how the finances work on a television show and how they get like the money back, but it could be years later.
Right.
It's so complicated. It's something
The
that
tax incentives that you hear about.
Yeah, it's something that I really
pass.
encourage you guys to go and listen to that episode because there is a lot to it that I thought educated me a lot more about how the process worked and what are the pitfalls right now about getting those tax incentives. Like, yeah, it's awesome they do it, but if you don't get that check for 2 years and you're paying interest on a loan, bad news. Like, this was all a bad investment.
I'm assuming no, because maybe it was too political to talk about. But I'm curious, did they talk about Canada being and Vancouver and Toronto being less attractive to shoot in now because of tariffs? And I mean, there's a lot of financial aspects to the production television production and film production with like the cross-border stuff.
Tariffs came up, and you're right. No, they didn't want to get overly political, but what they did say was it suggested that the powers that be aren't necessarily taking it seriously yet. Maybe they are in their offices, but they're not filtering it down to the showrunner level to be like, you need to help come up with plan B.
Right.
They haven't gotten a single note like that, is what they said.
We're going to have to learn how to make Minneapolis look like New York instead of Toronto look like New York.
Right.
You know?
Right. Yeah, exactly. So while I was doing that, you were watching Christine Baranski win her award.
The Achievement in Television Little E Capital X Excellence Award. Christine Baranski, I'm a huge fan of hers. Obviously, we cover the Gilded Age. She comes up a lot with in when we discuss with Beth any time of her work on The Good Fight and The Good Wife, because Beth was the set decorator on those shows. But I've just been a fan of hers forever. She impresses me as an actor. Listening to this, I was very impressed by the person. She's someone who, and I wrote down in my notes, she is not egotistical, or rather, she understands she's very good, but not in an obnoxious way. Just she understands her worth, but also that she appreciates that she was given breaks and she was given opportunities. And she was 41 when she jumped into television and has now had an outstanding television career that didn't begin until she was 41. Not most people begin the most important part of their career at 41. And here we are 30 years later. And now she's from Sybil to Good Fight, Good Wife, and The Gilded Age and Nine Perfect Strangers. She's won multiple Emmys. She's nominated all the time, even if she loses to Maggie Smith, which she did one year for Downton Abbey. But she's had this kind of storied career where she just really wanted to be a theater person, but she couldn't raise her two girls on that kind of career.
I think being 41 and being a woman is a very important part, because that's something that we ended up talking about in other panels, like the Golden Girls panel, where breaking into a new medium like that at 41 as a woman is really remarkable. And for us, I mean, I do think of her as TV. I mean, my goodness, between like Sybil and but even movies too, of course, like Bad Moms Christmas she's amazing. And
The Grinch with Jim Carrey.
She says stuff in there that my mom said, the dicking around thing. Oh my God. Like, she kills me. But we're watching her right now on Nine Perfect Strangers, and she's perfectly Baranski. Like, love it, love it, love it.
You know, it's funny. We were all talking about the Baranski kind of role, and Agnes Van Ryn has it. Obviously, it sounds a little bit like this Nine Perfect Strangers character has it. Diane Lockhart has it. There's a part of her who is clearly in this role. But listening to her talk, it's kind of interesting. She was talking about, someone asked her about power, and she's like, people with real power, they don't have to work at it. They don't have to do much at all because people come to them. And she said it like such a badass. But she's 1,000% right, because they were talking about how in courtroom scenes and legal dramas, and she was saying that legal dramas are the very hardest thing to do because she finds the words very difficult. They're multiple takes because you have to do coverage from like 5-6 different angles to get the judge, to get the jury, to get the prosecution, the defense, and everything. And so you're doing 5 takes maybe, and then breaking down, doing new setups. It's all the way into the night. So it's a real pain doing hard language. But how do you do that? You do less, kind of, and you don't try as hard, and you kind of let the power run through you. But she was saying it as someone who was letting the power kind of run through her. I don't know, it was very impressive. I walked away very impressed by her and just how she understands her career. She understands, like, she got to work with Sondheim on stage and Tom Stoppard on stage and Mike Nichols on stage. And that's not even like her career highlights. Like for theater people, those are 3, like, you work with those and you're done. Like, you've worked with giants. That was just her getting going. She worked with Chuck Lorre, and she credits Chuck Lorre kind of changing her life. That ends up being not the most important thing she's ever done. Then she met the Kings. Now she's with Julian Fellows, wrote Agnes Van Ryn for her. And it was a fight with Paramount and HBO trying to get her to do the show because The Good Fight was still going on. People chase her. The last question on the panel, this is just to summarize Christine Baranski. The last question on the panel was, are there any TV roles that you just haven't done that you just want to go get? And she's like, no, they come to me. drop the mic and then walk off the stage. You don't. That's who she is, and I walked away very impressed.
She
by
feels
her.
like one of those girls who is very popular and doesn't have to ever say I'm popular. Like that would be bizarre to say that because she is so popular, but she's so like self-assured, and there's something about her that feels like her wit. I think, having seen her in person now at the awards and at Gilded Age, her characters are well written, but there's clearly
she's in them.
She is there delivering those lines, and that quick sharpness is in her. I love that she credited her mom for a lot of that in our Gilded Age thing about how, she figured out her withering stare and all this stuff. Like, there's something about her that she just came from a long line of really strong women,
right.
and she maintains that line. And as much as you would do that if you were a Vanderbilt or anybody else, whether it's money or whether it's reputation or talent, you don't talk about your talent because y'all know we come from a long line of talented people. And it's like she has that strength in her. You
know what I liked about her? This is part of the whole, she's not egotistical, but she knows she's good. She knows she's competent. She doesn't falsely self-deprecate. Do you know the people that are like, oh, I'm nothing. I've just been, No, she doesn't self-deprecate in any way, shape, or form. She wasn't like, I'm not as good as, no, I'm good. I'm Christine Baranski. That's, with an eye on the end. Remember it, but again, not in a way that turns you off in any kind of way, shape, or form at all. And this is someone now in her 70s, right? I think she has to be like 73, 74-ish. She says things like they gave me a fella. Or she was talking about her mom. She was an old broad, she says words like that, and she's from Buffalo. But there's also this like very sophisticated kind of fierceness to her that kind of in every word and every sentence she says, you feel. She's hard to ignore. I think you'd be hard pressed to ignore her in a room. So after that, Caroline, you went to try and save Mr. Rogers in Sesame Street and learn all about PBS.
I did, and I learned a lot. We had panelist Terry Licona, and we had Sarah Robertson. Terry is with Austin City Limits. He's the executive producer, and Sarah is the chief content officer at the Austin PBS. I learned a ton about how PBS works, and I really encourage you guys to go out there and look and read about everything. You can go to protectmypublicmedia.org and you can find out what you can do to help. Of course, all of us know, I mean, it is cliche to say the PBS pledge drive, right? Like we're all like laughing like, oh my gosh, I've never donated to that. I guarantee you I will donate to it now. The explanation of how many communities that they impact, from special needs to putting out the emergency broadcast system for rural communities. This is like their main form of getting information, to communities who don't have access to preschool and being able to put out things that we all know and love, like Mr. Rogers or Sesame Street. But then also Austin City Limits. You guys might not even realize that has been on for 50 years. That is amazing. And they have artists from Willie Nelson to the Foo Fighters who get paid $500. That's it, to be on there. And you know what? People line up to do it because they break new artists. They are the place where you get to see a concert that, again, if you live someplace where you have no access to this, you have the chance to actually see your favorite artist perform commercial free, just like you would if you were at the concert in the comfort of your own home. So I really encourage you guys to get involved with your local PBS station, find out more about what they're doing, get involved, volunteer if you can. It really matters. And one thing that I didn't know is that some of the funding for PBS Kids comes directly out of the education department. So again, not being political, but they're talking about getting rid of the education department that is already changing the content of PBS Kids right now as we speak. And it hasn't even happened yet. So for all of you guys who have PBS Kids lovers like Paul and I do, who are on apps, who are loving all these different little characters like Carl the raccoon, Carl the collector he's called, who has autism. He's this little raccoon. I mean, you guys, there's so much amazing content coming out of PBS. It gets overlooked as like the, oh, that's just that free channel, whatever. But I'm telling you, the content is timeless and it is important. So please go check that out. Again, it's protectmypublicmedia.org.
Then it was time to revisit Baranski. We were back with the Gilded Age panel. This was in the State Theater. It had Carrie Coon, it had Morgan Spector, and it had Christine Baranski. Jessica Shaw was the moderator, and I don't know, it was a good panel. It was an interesting panel. I think all three of them were kind of on fire. Carrie Coon was feisty.
What's your hesitancy over there? You're like, oh,
I'm trying to find my words.
Okay, because I was like, I thought it was amazing.
I was still thinking about the fact that I said Gilded Age podcast instead of panel. So
okay, well, here's the thing, guys. I think as a woman, I loved Carrie Coon's spiciness. Like, she was in it there. She was on point because we saw her in this and Leftovers. She was talking a mile a minute. She was animated. Paul has some amazing pictures. Go check out our Instagram, Pod Clubhouse, because he's got these amazing photographs of her doing all kinds of poses. Christine Baranski actually did a mic drop.
She did. Well, I think more threw the mic away because she was getting herself, I think she felt herself saying things that were too political or too many things that she didn't want like Deadline to pick up or, a podcast to pick up and say she said, because she was making some points about the fact that robber barons, while questionable human beings, built cultural institutions that are still around today and that they supported the arts.
And they got things done. That was her line. They got things done.
And then Morgan Spector said into the microphone, whispered, "So did Mussolini," which was very funny. But the larger point, setting aside their business exploits, as someone who makes her living in the arts, she was saying that by comparison, today's tech oligarchs and tech robber barons do not support the arts, and that they should be ashamed of themselves, and that it is a crime that the arts are suffering the way they are with lack of patrons, where these people have all this money to do and that they're not doing with. And she was starting to fall down this rabbit hole of saying things, and I think she finally literally had to throw the microphone away from herself.
So, Paula, we cover the Gilded Age, Mike and I do, but you are just a watcher. An enjoyer of it. So what did you think of this panel? How did it hit you differently?
Well, for one thing, I didn't expect Morgan Spector, George Russell, to come out in a custom denim outfit that was like, what would you call that? Embroidered?
Embroidered, probably. Maybe painted it. You have to look up close. But floral. Head to toe floral, which George Russell, hello. I mean, we've seen him in suits and everything, but this was a suit of a different type. I loved that Carrie Coon was calling him the avatar of masculinity.
Morgan, you're an avatar of masculinity, she turned to him.
I think that was an amazing line. And
his beard is as impressive in person as it is.
I felt like that the beard itself should have been a panelist, just like as a separate thing.
Right. How do you feel being on Morgan's face? Because it's the thing with Rip, right? From Yellowstone.
They look like two different humans without them.
With and without the beard, but Morgan Spector?
Y'all, I do not want Cole Hauser in any form or fashion, but Rip all day long, all right? So the beard matters. But here's the thing. I felt like Morgan did a great job of, he kind of had to come out of his shell because of Carrie and Christine being so vibrant and so talkative. And of course being, I'm sure, used to being interviewed quite a bit more, I think. But what else did you find different about the panel?
I agree. Since I was taking pictures, all the first 20 minutes of the panel with Morgan in my pictures, he's looking down, his eyes are hard to make out, but then eventually he starts to come out of his, not shell, but just he finds his comfort zone a little bit better.
I think so.
And he starts being more emotive. And by the end of it, he was making some pretty sharp comments where, like, you're right. Carrie Coon was...
Oh, she was
fired up.
Fired up.
She was wearing that duster jacket, like the long, duster jacket.
With a short skirt. It was that exact line.
I thought of that jacket like something off of like the David Byrne collection.
For sure.
Oversized jacket.
It's like Neo's jacket from The Matrix, but in khaki instead of pleather.
Yeah.
Yeah, but I get it, you guys. That type of outfit is extremely powerful because she can like show her leg if she wants to.
And she
did when she wanted to. And she kind of played with the audience by kind of like uncovering her leg or not covering her leg.
She was so on it though. Like that moment where the moderator asked if anyone had read this certain book, and she goes, "Well, I was a literature major." And this
literally at the top of this page right here, my notes was this moment. Yeah.
So funny the way she said it, because she was bragging, but not in the way that you would with friends. And
right.
It was.
She was bringing everyone into her friend circle.
Yeah.
It's very much like,
Yeah.
we're all here. We're all here for the same reason. Kind of come around.
And I like when
The way
they-
you'd brag about your major with your friends when they all know, it's no big deal. Everyone's got one. It's no big deal.
I like that she was being playful because sometimes I feel like, when people are being interviewed, they can be a little bit too like uptight and, worried they're going to say the wrong thing, do the wrong thing, whatever. And I thought that this panel in general was loose and talkative, and they wanted to share about the new season coming out, which was great.
Mm-hmm.
I'm excited they were talking about that. I love their little Bertha and Agnes, back and forth when they needed to talk that way. But in a good way, like that's the way that they would be, So I thought all of that was.
What'd you say? Like I think I'm doing fine on my own.
Well,
thanks.
because they said, could Bertha get any
Bertha,
advice from Agnes? And she's like, I think Bertha is doing just fine.
But then she made sure, because she realized, she was like, but Carrie Coon will always accept advice from Christine Baranski.
Right. And that was cute. And I thought they had
was.
like a cool rapport. Also, to find out that like an actual shooting wise, they don't see each other. Carrie Coon doesn't get a chance to work with Baranski hardly at all, because they're shooting in their own homes, and their storylines they're not friends, and their storylines don't cross over in person. Like they do cross over, their intentions cross over, but not on screen necessarily.
The 2 times that we've seen Agnes Van Ryn cross 61st Street to go to the Russell house, it's only happened twice, and the show acts like she's crossing the Delaware. Like it is a dramatic moment when she like hikes the dress and comes across the street in the CGI street. It's they don't interact very much at all.
But I didn't really realize that. And that's something that you forget about, like in shooting and stuff like that, where you're talking about, well, you guys must be friends, you're Bertha and Agnes. And it's like, no, dog, we don't even see each other at work. I'm very excited for the upcoming season of Gilded Age. I think from the little clips from what I saw, and you guys, I'm telling you insider information just from the trailer that they showed us. And it plays at the beginning of pretty much any panel. They have like a montage of trailers that they play. And one of the things that they showed was a lot of white flowers coming down the staircase. And I'm sorry, there's only one event that you have that many white flowers on a staircase. So this is just my guess. This is not based on anything other than the trailer we saw at ATX. And that is just that I think that there's got to be a marriage happening at some point in this next season. I'm excited for that because that has been on the cusp for really the entire time we've been watching the show. It's been threatened that there's going to be an arranged marriage of some sort.
So all 3 characters kind of gave like a quick 2-sentence snippet about what their season's going to be. And so Carrie Coon said Bertha's season, more than any other, is going to be about the mother-daughter relationship, which is interesting because the overarching theme of all of her storyline is she said something along the lines of women couldn't be allowed to be anything more than just the head of their households. So where do they put their ambition? Into their children. And for Bertha, that is making sure Gladys marries well so that Gladys can have the life that she would want Gladys to have and the power and station she would want Gladys to have. That it's cliche to say, I know better than you, but in this case, Bertha does know better than Gladys for this world because Gladys doesn't understand the world as it is. And for Gladys to have the life that she would want Gladys to have, she has to intercede. So season 3 is going to be very much of a coming of ahead, which is where we were left off in season 2, where maybe at the Opera Wars conclusion, there were some glances and maybe some promises were made. Maybe there was a duke being promised a marriage, which is going to be, because one of the things she said was, just because Bertha usually gets what she wants doesn't mean it doesn't come without consequences. And so it's very easy to tease that George and Bertha will come to a head of some kind of issue because he had made promises to his daughter that she would be able to marry for love. And if Bertha has something opposite in mind, that he may not be able to fulfill that promise. George is going to be busy building the Transcontinental Railroad, which in real history has already occurred for where Gilded Age is. So they're playing with time a little bit, but it makes sense for George as being a Jay Gould kind of stand-in with a little bit of Vanderbilt stand-in also to do. And obviously Agnes's challenge is going to be not the head of her household, living under Ada's rule because Ada has the money. And it looks like the temperance movement is going to be a storyline, at least initially in the beginning of the season, where Agnes, who does not teetotally will have to deal with temperance workers coming into her home, which is not really her home anymore. But I guess the takeoff is that Ada is championing causes with her newfound wealth that she thinks Luke, her passed away pastor husband, would have cared about.
So I think exciting. One thing I did not know was that I did not know season 3 was like up in the air, that they didn't know they were going to have a season 3 or not. I was like outraged when I heard that. I was like, wait, what?
Which makes us think that we are going to have to all make sure we tune in so we get a season 4.
And like, it's one of those things like contact your congressman kind of thing. Like if you want more, best speak up, because I thought that was a shoo-in. I had no idea it was a possibility of not happening.
I do feel like the show has only gotten more popular as the seasons have gone on, though. I feel like season 2 ended up being more of a touchstone, water cooler moment show than season 1 did.
That makes sense.
There's a point where their contracts lapse, and Morgan said that happened.
During the writer strike. It was during the actor strike that contracts lapse.
That's usually a we're all done kind of moment for TV.
Right.
So freaky.
He said, he's like, well, I thought that was the end of it because they wouldn't have let that lapse if they didn't want to.
Yeah.
I think that's crazy. That's so crazy.
So after Gilded Age, we had a little break. We got some food, and then we all had to go get online for the giant Leftovers reunion panel that was happening at the Paramount. I obviously missed Leftovers a bit. I know it's a show that really resonated with you guys, and it was like the origin of your podcasting journey. It was The Leftovers. But I was impressed at the amount of people that they got to come out here. Big stars, Damon, Tom Perrotta, who, obviously they had already been around at ATX this weekend. But what did you guys think? As far as Leftovers coverage that's happened at ATX, how did this stack up to what you've seen in the past?
Oh, I think this was the most amount of cast we've had in one place at one time.
Yeah.
So
and the biggest room.
Who did we have? We had Damon Lindelof, who is the showrunner. We had Ann Dowd, who played Patty. We had Tom Perrotta, who is the author of the original source material. We had Amy Brenneman, who played Lori. That was Kevin's wife on the show. Unfortunately, we didn't have Justin Theroux, though he was originally whispered around as a potential. We had Carrie Coon, who played Nora on the show.
And Kevin Carroll was supposed to be there, but
Yes.
I guess his flight was delayed, and so he was a scratch.
That was a bummer. Kevin Carroll played John Murphy, the neighbor. So I thought it was an amazing panel. I mean, this was a great collection of different actors who played all different parts in the show, meaning like they all had their own storylines. And I was surprised that like with some of them, like that Carrie didn't get to work that much with the other women, because like say Anne was working really almost exclusively one-on-one with Justin Theroux in seasons 2, maybe even 3, I guess, right?
She's only in 3 for that one,
Just a wee bit.
episode
Yes.
that takes place in the other area.
Yes. To kind of understand everyone's dynamic was fresh for me. What did you think, Paul, to get to see this gang again that really did bring us into podcasting?
Oh, I thoroughly enjoyed it. The very first Leftovers panel we saw was with Damon, Tom, Chris Eccleston, Ann Dowd, and Carrie Coon. And this was before Carrie Coon was Carrie Coon. So I don't remember her saying all that much all those years ago at that first panel. That was right when they were soft rebooting the show into the family moving to Texas. And so they were all nearby shooting. One thing that I found in just talking to people in various lines that had come specifically for Leftovers things was more than one little group had made the sojourn to Lockhart to see Jardin in real life. And I thought that was kind of neat, because I thought I was spilling some truth on them. Like, hey, they filmed it. I know, I was there yesterday. But yeah.
No, it was super cool. Was there anything that struck you, Mike, since you were not as big of a fan as Paul and I were? Definitely, I have to imagine it all hits differently.
I think there are a couple of interesting nuggets that came out for it. I wasn't so familiar with Mimi Leader and her contribution to the show, but it was very well expressed during this panel that Mimi was a difference maker for the cast. I mean, I think there was a story where Justin Theroux came up to Damon during the filming of episode 5 from season 1, which was Mimi Leader's first episode directing. That's when she came on board, and said to Damon, "Don't let her go." Which, I mean, your star is telling you that this director who is just showing up out of the blue 5 episodes in
Don't Let Her Go is pretty significant. And she ends up going to be obviously a frequent director of the show, but also a producer on the show. There was a funny story about, I guess her first episode was, there was a stoning in it. And she's looking at the script and she's like, "I've never been to a stoning."
That was
which
so
is
funny
just a
when
very
she
funny
said
sentence. Yeah.
Yeah, it was. Well, I mean, it did make you wonder, like, as thinking of a director's job, if you have to direct something you've never even seen happen before. We think of those kinds of things in maybe like really out there, like sci-fi or dystopian type stuff. I know this is like that, but this is also rooted in real life, and so it's like, how do you shoot something that you don't know what it looks like? And when she described the process of them throwing like the fake rocks, the stunt rocks, if you will, at the actress, and that it was actually hurting her, and that was like, no, this is no good, and how they had to figure out how to do close-ups, but then have them like make a dummy basically of her and then throw real rocks. The whole process was like, I never thought about how you would go about doing that, and Mimi was really gracious to share all that, I thought.
If you go back into Mimi's filmography, she was more active as a theatrical director in the 90s. And the two movies that I can think of off the top of my head are The Peacemaker with George Clooney. So that's like spies and stuff like that. And then the other asteroid movie, Deep Impact. So not Armageddon, but Deep Impact, the one that actually had a little science in it. As opposed
The Chicago Hope of asteroid movies.
Basically,
as it were,
yeah.
To ER, yeah.
But so she is somewhat accustomed to drawing from something to create fantastical images, because those are not run-of-the-mill type movies. You know, they're effects heavy, stunt heavy.
And especially when this was being done, it wasn't being done now where technology has come so far. I mean, she was talking about kind of green screening and special effects that in 2006 or so would have been expensive and cost prohibitive, but she worked it out and made it work without having to actually, stone the actor who she had. I thought the other interesting Mimi Leader story about her, again, she was on the panel, but they were feting her, which I thought was very nice, was how Amy Brenneman, whenever Damon wasn't on set, I thought it was interesting how she said until Mimi showed up, she felt unprotected. She felt like, not physically necessarily, but like, I guess emotionally was kind of how I took it, that she didn't think anyone was looking out for her, and maybe the cast at whole, but she was talking about herself specifically, or looking out for her interests, because I think the story was that she caught a non-colorized version of the dailies from the early episodes and saw how, I think in her words, bad Lori looked on camera. This is a little bit of vanity for sure, given it's the guilty remnant and the smoking and all of that. But as an actor, Amy took that very hard as a successful actor who had been around for a long time. I think Amy felt very sensitive about that and very exposed about that. And Mimi showing up made her feel like someone would be having her back behind the camera. I thought, one, that was an interesting story to tell so many years later, but two, I think underlines how important Mimi ended up being to the success of the show. What did you guys make of the story? Had you heard that story before? I'm not sure if that was new information or not.
I had never heard about it, and I really respect what Amy was saying in terms of being a woman on a screen. You really want to look your best at any point in time. And so I felt like when she was talking about feeling taken care of, how I heard that, it wasn't necessarily like, it wasn't anything like she felt like, quote, like unsafe or something like that, but more like the way that it shot, she wanted it to make sure that it wasn't like horrible angles and, like be kind. Like she's like, because how she was saying, sneaking the chapstick or lip gloss or something like that, because she just, she's used to having hair and makeup done. And this, they wanted nothing. And that would be really intimidating to be on camera with nothing when all these other characters have full hair and makeup. She's having to stand next to Carrie Coon, metaphorically, who is all dolled up, and it's like, that's not fair. Like, why do I have to look like this? So I felt like she was expressing to me that like this fellow woman was going to make sure that the way that she was shown, while it needed to look raw, it wasn't going to make her feel embarrassed in any way.
I didn't get any physical safety aspect from what she was saying.
Yeah, it definitely felt emotional, right? Yeah.
Yeah.
It was funny. This was we had seen Damon earlier on day 1 or day 2 on Friday in the showrunners and authors panel, where he had talked about a note that HBO had given them about making sure they made Justin, or the character of Kevin, more active. And in the end, that ended up being a very good note that probably actually allowed them to get the show made. He gave a story where they were talking about season 2, and HBO was watching the first episode and nodding their head. Okay, you've moved the entire story to Texas from New York, and okay, and where is Justin Theroux and Carrie Coon? And Damon's like, oh, it's going to be great. They're going to show up like episode 4 or 5 of season 2, and HBO suits nodding their head and go, how about 40 minutes into episode 1 of season 2? How about that? And Damon laughed and he said, that was a good note. Could you imagine not having seen, Justin or Carrie show up until the middle to end of the second season?
Well, here's the thing, though. I definitely appreciate the note, and I do, because there are some really great moments with Kevin's family that happened, including music. I mean, that Lo Fang song was like life-changing for me in the moment when I heard it. I was like, oh my God. It was a cover of The One That I Want from Grease. And it was just like nothing I ever heard before. But that's The Leftovers, like in a package. It's nothing that I've ever seen or heard before. I actually think that Kevin and Regina could have carried quite a bit, actually. I think that maybe HBO didn't realize 100% that, no, I think they actually could have done a really great job for at least a couple of episodes. I think it's a fascinating note, but HBO could have played that differently, and we could have followed what Damon's ideas were there, and I think it still would have been pretty successful. What do you think, Paul?
I agree with HBO. They hadn't earned the ability to get cute with the audience yet based on season 1. Season 1 was super bleak and had, pretty iconically scary imagery with the grand gesture at the end of the season. So if they were going to reboot and show this entirely different family and not even mention the Garveys, sorry, that would have been a loser. Like, there was an episode in season 3 when they got cute, and it was the episode with Mark Lynn Baker, and they played, instead of the Let the Mystery Be theme song, they played the Perfect Strangers theme song.
Oh yeah,
and I like that. That worked for me.
But that's because you're the right age.
Yeah,
there were
Perfect
all
Strangers
these,
is definitely in my callback zone for sure.
There were all these live tweeters that were like, "This is horrible. Why'd you change it?" They had no idea what it was, and so they hadn't.
Don't be ridiculous.
and to an extent, they had earned that joke, and there were several
Mark
earned
Lynn Baker
jokes.
had been part of it.
There was like the dick scanner. Was an earned thing, or
I don't know if you remember that, Mike, but instead of like a retina scanner, you had to put your dick on the scanner.
or the chalice of semen that they brought up as a looking for Easter eggs where there aren't any, kind of just poking fun at the audience. Like they had, for at least for the ones that had really dug into the show, that was a really funny joke that you knew once she said it that he would have to drink his own semen.
Well, that was the thing that Damon got right at the end, was like, what's going to happen with the chalice? Is that going to pay off in the end, right? That Damon said.
Yes.
More than one fan had asked him.
I hate that I have to be the lady to be like, no, it's that it's a cup full. I'm a lady.
Well, as we are collectors, and so we had gotten
of chalices.
We had gotten a copy of the National Geographic that was featured in season 1, and there's one of the big stories in that National Geographic is all about modern day Cairo, at least modern day for 1972 or whenever that issue came out. And so when she mentioned going to the pyramids or something in that joke, those of us that had read that were like, all right, here it comes. And then it was a cup of semen. So it was, it was funny. I enjoyed it. But to your previous point, they had laid the groundwork to earn all that stuff, I thought. Whereas changing gears to not have the Garveys in the first episode of the second season, no. Bad idea. I like the way they wound up doing it, just showing them at the very end, moving in next door.
I think for me, the last thing that really stuck out of the panel, and also I hadn't ever seen her live before, was Ann Dowd, who appeared on the panel, and she didn't speak a lot, but when she did, man, I just wanted to give her a hug. She told a story about how, well, they were talking about how they would, integrate Patty back in the show going on, and then when they got to season 3 and they were in Australia, I guess she was living with Justin Theroux, which I thought was interesting, versus staying at the, I guess, shooting hotel or the hotel for the show. I guess he had rented a house. But how Justin really kind of had talked her through a major anxiety attack. It was very sweet. It was very sensitive. It was very vulnerable. I mean, this was a packed Paramount theater. And she was just being all sorts of exposed and raw up on stage. I don't know, maybe want to definitely give her a hug and think of her as, Patty and not so much as Aunt Lydia from Handmaid's.
It's funny because we just finished our Handmaid's Tale coverage, so we had been steeped in her as Aunt Lydia, but seeing her in person again, no, she was Ann Dowd. There's no part of her that was Patty or Aunt Lydia when she was on that stage. Yeah. She was Ann Dowd, and she was sweetheart. I loved that she was telling sweet stories and expressing, being really open. I thought she didn't have to be, and she was being extremely open. As Leftovers fans, I found this panel extremely satisfying. People asked good questions, and I felt like the panel themselves wanted to tell stories and wanted to share what their experience was like, which was great.
I think my favorite quote of the panel actually came out of a audience question. It was Damon. This is like right towards the very end. Actually, I guess the very end, they talked about how they found Max Richter and got his music and got him on board for the show. But the quote from Damon was, this is a close paraphrase: "The avoidance of suffering is the worst kind of suffering. Sometimes you just have to lean in and deal with it." I don't know, that struck me, and I made sure I wrote it down, and I've just been thinking about it for a while, because I think there's always this knee-jerk reaction to avoid and run from any kind of suffering, but I think the lesson of The Leftovers is that you do have to lean into it, and it won't go away, so you do have to maybe confront it, or as best you can, maybe you have to literally go
through.
Yes, no way around. You have to go through.
Mm-hmm.
So, one key thing that I learned in this panel that I hadn't heard before was that Damon had to chase this project a little bit. I thought I understood that he had wanted to go forward with Tom independently, but what they described was that Tom was already teamed up with HBO. They just didn't have a showrunner. And so Damon had to talk himself into that role. It wasn't his for the taking. But Tom liked him, and what you said, Mike, a second ago just reminded me just how quick-witted and quotable Damon seems to always be. And those were the same qualities that Tom latched onto immediately in their first meeting that they described.
And the thing, I'm sure he's given that line before. I'm sure he has given a lot of these lines before at the various talks he's had to do. There's absolutely nothing about him that comes off as anything less than completely sincere all the time. And he said, actually, about the show, he said, this is the show that still sits like closest to my heart, and the relationships I made, and you think about the guy who was one of the two heads of Lost for so long, which looms much larger in my life in rear view than The Leftovers. I think that's a significant statement about his own experience, and the way he talks about it, I think, is reflected in that, and how important this show was to him, even 10 years on now.
10 years ago, he was talking about the nature of the departure and rapture versus just some other event. And he went on a little mini rant that I don't remember it verbatim. Do you remember this, Caroline? When he said something to the effect of that a lot of people in his circle, I guess, in his sphere, refer to spirituality, but not religion, and all these other qualities that are just sort of generically assigned to religious beliefs, but they don't want to be too specific. And then he said, "You're talking about the Force. You believe in the Force." It stuck with me this whole time because it was just so dead on for me that he said that.
The entire show has always had like a massive impact on me. I mean, anyone who is a caretaker out there has got to watch Matt and the experience that he has with his wife and come away different, I think. Any person who has experienced any amount of loss is going to find themselves in this show. So if you haven't watched it, listeners, know that it was the reason Paul and I ever got involved in podcasting at all, because we needed to talk out our feelings about what we were seeing on this screen. And we couldn't find as many people who were watching the show. It was smaller, as opposed to like Lost, where we could hop onto pretty much any social platform and talk about it, or even locally, we sat in our friends' living rooms talking about it. But this was something where we needed to get a wider audience in order to find people. And we did. That's the thing. There is such an amazing, if you guys end up watching it, there is a Facebook group called The Leftovers Group, and it's run by a gentleman named Russell, and he's wonderful. They actually plan outings on October 14th to go to Jordan, if you will, aka Lockhart, Texas. And we've gathered there before. We had lovely lunch with everybody. We all talked about what the show meant to us. People came from New York. People came from all over the place to join together. I mean, there was probably at least a dozen of us. People brought their spouses and stuff. And I mean, it was really cool. We all wore white. We all fake smoked.
We all saw the sights. Like
we saw the bridge. We got to go see the water. How would you describe that area? The
falls.
Yeah.
Where Evie and her friends go swimming
right.
with Dr. What's his name? It's like Livingston or, some name like that. That's all easily accessible. It's right there to see. Surprisingly close, actually, given the way that it seems on the show when they're like, "Oh, the lake just dried up," and they're just showing like a different hole in the ground. It's, but it's all right next to each other. That was a fun time seeing that, because we actually saw Lockhart when it was decked out as Jordan, so we could point out where all these different things were. There was actually like a little gift shop that they had made that never appeared on camera, and we watched this very closely, and you could never really find it, but they had a whole little gift shop full of props that matched the show, as if you're going to the Miracle National Park or whatever it is, and we wanted to buy some merch.
Did you remember that? So in order to get into Jordan in the second season, people had wristbands, and we actually got wristbands that looked the same, and we still have our wristbands, like as if we are actually community members of Miracle, Texas, if you will. So hilarious.
That's very cool.
It meant a lot to us, honestly. It meant a whole lot to us. I'm so glad we got to see them all again. And it was, you know what? I said this to Paul, and I'm going to say this, and this is going to sound kind of funny, but we feel older having watched the show so many years ago. And there was something actually extremely comforting to me to see these familiar faces, also older, also clearly had gone through more stuff themselves. Something about that made me feel like we kind of were all still doing this together. Like they didn't show up all shiny and perfect, like they looked older. They looked like, they had more things go on. And I don't know why I found that really, really comforting to me.
When you watch it and you know that they never got any recognition for that show, no nominations, no nothing ever came from that show. I don't know. If you've watched Justin Theroux's other roles, dating back all the way to like American Psycho, to The Mosquito Coast, to the one that he's on about the basketball team on Netflix, he's never played anything like Kevin in any. It's not like he's just playing another version of himself. Kevin's a very intense, screwed up guy, and he never really got any recognition for it. I thought that sucked at the time that he didn't get any major kudos for that.
Awards?
Well, it's just, if you see he's a very capable actor, obviously, because he plays very different guys all the time. And nobody's ever been as intense as Kevin that I've seen without being super stylized like American Psycho.
Well, especially like if people are watching, him most recently in like Beetlejuice 2, you're not getting all that Justin Theroux can do at all. And like, please, especially if you're a younger listener, Please do not like look at, say, Tropic Thunder and say Beetlejuice 2 and say, this is what this guy is. I'm not going to go watch or whatever. He's a comedian and he's not anything else. Like, no, he killed this role. And at the time when it was being filmed, people were like falling over themselves about what an accomplished actor he really is.
His abs don't hurt either.
Or those gray sweatpants.
Gray
Hey, speaking of some gray sweatpants, there's another guy who has been pictured many a time in his gray sweatpants, which is Mr. John Hamm.
This is a real hottie batati reunion. Nostalgia
we're
night.
going to head over to Mad Men, you guys, because we had an amazing panel with John Slattery and John Hamm, and I thought it was great. Did both of you guys watch Mad Men?
Yes.
All the way through.
What did you feel seeing these two men in person?
It should be illegal how good looking they remain.
I mean, they live up to whatever I had in my mind in terms of being
Sexy AF?
yeah, and funny and all that you'd want them to be. Like, it took a minute. It probably took 20 minutes for Slattery to kind of warm up. And it seemed for a minute like he was not going to add that much to the panel. But then all of a sudden, he starts remembering stories and lines and events. And he has a lot of things to say about his time on Mad Men. One thing about panels, Caroline and I bemoan, because we've seen so many, is that often the strongest memories are from the pilot. It's almost predictable that when, I don't know, it's like an NPC that stands up in every panel and says, do you have a favorite memory from the show? And the answer is always, well, I remember the pilot. I don't know if you've ever found that to be true, Mike.
Oh, yeah, it feels like a go-to answer. And it was here. I mean, when they went back and ultimately talked about their memory, the two of them geeked out about how, did we just become best friends? Like, talking about
But
the
eventually
pilot.
they did get to other stuff, which was thrilling.
They did. And especially when they talked about Elizabeth Moss, I think they both reached for other memories and other times of having worked with her.
John Hamm was very generous with the way that the moderator, Noah Hawley, wanted to skip over January Jones's contribution to the show by only recognizing Christina Hendricks and Elizabeth Moss. And Hamm was like,
He also called her
and
Christina
January
Hendricks.
Jones, of course.
Yeah. And Slattery brought up his wife. So, and both on the show and in real life as well.
That's true.
Like,
yeah.
pointing out, like, he also had a great woman behind him. I think that one of the things that surprised me was the dynamic between the moderator and them, actually. Because John Hamm and Noah Hawley had just come off of a project together, and their interaction wasn't exactly what I expected. Normally, our moderator is kind of a fan themselves. A pretty big fan usually. And so they tend to be pretty excited about interviewing this person. But because they had just worked on a project together, there wasn't that fan enthusiasm that we're used to. And I think that kind of changed the energy a little bit for whenever they asked questions. Whenever the Johns were talking, I felt like they kept the energy up. But whenever Noah would ask a question, it's sort of like he didn't have the date right. He was asking like, well, what were you guys doing in 2006? And they're like, we actually filmed this in 2005. Like,
He made a bit too much about himself a little bit. Like he showed this advertisement at the beginning.
I totally forgot about that already.
Just when you said that, my heart went, oh, yeah.
And I thought, is this like a Sterling Cooper advertisement that I forgot?
Yeah.
And it turns out, no, it was an advertisement that his mom had been in the early 60s. Oh, okay. Anyway, and like you said, Caroline, the misquoting, like where when he misquoted
gosh.
the
That's what the money
the
is
money
for?
is the thank you.
Yeah.
No, bro.
It's, we were
It's on the shirts that they're
It was
selling.
literally on the back of the shirts.
That was hard. And so that's what I'm saying. Like, I think I'm being kind in saying like we were missing the fan element, the things that like fans would not get wrong. We were missing that enthusiasm. And they were too close of like being colleague friends. Like, so sort of there wasn't that warmth that I was looking for between them, and there wasn't that enthusiasm. And so it created kind of a funny thing. Honestly, the Johns, when they were running the show, everything went great. And if they just took some questions from the audience, that would have been fine. It kind of seemed like whenever we had a question from the moderator, that's when it would actually slow the pace down and kind of take the energy down.
It felt a little bit like Noah had been told this was going to be a date between him and Hamm, and then that John brought Slattery along, and Noah was like, well, I did not plan on you bringing another person to this soiree, John. You know, because the energy was very much between like Noah and John Hamm, and then John Hamm had to bring Slattery really into the conversations. You're 1,000% right. The best parts of the panel, the parts that made you laugh, made you smile, made you think about, man, what I like about these guys from the show was when Hamm and Slattery were just going back and forth together. We're smiling at each other. I mean, these two genuinely smile at each other and make each other laugh, which after so many years to see that kind of chemistry still there, because it was my favorite part of Mad Men. I loved Roger and Don. Their chemistry on the show always got me, always made me lean forward. I always wanted to see what they were going to get up to. So they were definitely the bright parts when they were rolling. Did you guys learn anything new? I mean, we all watched the show. Was there anything a surprise from the panel that you learned?
To me, John Hamm was made to play Don Draper. I couldn't think of another actor that I'd want to see try that role, you know.
Such as John Slattery? Could you see John Slattery?
Actually, no. I don't think he'd be as good a match. There's something about the way that he fits the mold, you know, in terms of like the size of his body, the squareness of his jaw, the way that his hair combs, just everything about it fits the mold perfectly. And so the fact that his casting didn't sound like a slam dunk, and we all know that he had spent a little bit of time as like a drama teacher, which, you know, is not usually like the a lot of people, when they make it, you know, but he had to wait well into his 30s before he was noticed. I mean, it's all been great after that, but getting to that point, it's eye-opening that someone of that
he
stature
didn't seem to
had that
take it
problem.
for granted, though, right? I mean, he seemed very appreciative of. This is kind of what I was thinking about when I was listening to Christine Baranski talk, who got her comedy TV career started in her 40s. They are good. They know they're good. They are confident people, but they're not braggadocious, nor do they seem to have forgotten, you know, where they came from or how long it took for them to take off. And I like that, because that makes you like the person as much as you like maybe the character that they play.
Just Hamm, he's a little confounding for me, because it's like he would have been great in a lot of different roles. I still believe that had he gotten the opportunity to play Batman at the right age,
Oh yeah.
he would have been a supremely good Bruce Wayne and
He's
Batman.
built very much built like at the
He has
square
the jaw
body
for the
type.
mask, and that's the key
jaw,
on that
the-
one.
I'm still hoping that someone will revive like a Batman Beyond, and he could be the elder Bruce Wayne.
Oh,
Yeah.
I like that. You asked about like, what do I think about like, could Slattery have played Don Draper? And here's the thing: when you look at these two men next to each other, Slattery has a real blue blood look to him. His facial features, his body type. He could body double for Anderson Cooper like any day of the week. And that doesn't match up with the blue collar side that Don Draper had to have. He had to have a man who you could believe like worked with his hands at some point, or which there's nothing. I mean, Roger Sterling has a manicure, and so does John Slattery, you know? And so that's the look that he gives off. He has the charisma, he has the charm, he has all of that, but just, I honestly feel like physically you needed to have somebody who looks like they could throw a punch and take a punch. That is not Slattery.
Well, all the more reason then. I thought this was at the beginning of the panel, was Matt Weiner reached out to Slattery and said, I want you to read for this part. And the part that he had him read for and prepare for was Don Draper. And I think one of the best lines from the panel was Slattery gets the script, he goes through it, and he calls Matt and he goes, are you sure this guy? I don't know that I'm this guy. And he was like, no, that's the one. So John, he's an actor. He wants a job. He goes, he does the reading. He does as good as he gets. And Matt goes, okay, great. Now, well, we've already cast that guy, but listen, it's a small part. It's made for you. It's going to be a great part, and it's going to grow. So it was funny to listen to John Slattery essentially be bait and switch just to get him in the room to dangle the large leading part, because Matt, Weiner knew he wanted him for Roger. And I think you guys are both right. And I think he said during the panel, the difference between Roger and Don is the show, but Roger is the guy who finds the Don Draper. And I think John Slattery's whole vibe is the one who finds the John Hamm. Right. So I thought it really, talk about kismet and fate. Those two really did fall into the roles that they should have played.
I love that they like sat around and drank together, like when it was not the show as well. Like there's something about that, knowing that they're buddies. I always like to know that outside the show that people really do care about each other and really do enjoy each other's company. I think it shows so much up on the screen when people are genuinely friends. And these two seem like they would be like amazing to hang out with. And that whole like, who'd you invite to dinner? I would include Eugene Levy. I would include these two guys as well.
Paul, you talked about how John Hamm had kind of a long road to the role, to actually getting the role, even though it's hard to imagine anyone else doing it. He brought that up, and he talked about how the fact that he was like, well, I'm glad you knew what role you were getting to John Slattery. He goes, no one would tell me. He's like, they brought me in like 9 different times to read, to do this scene. He's like, by the time I was done, I had gone all the way through the pilot, every scene of it, because I had to come back and read for different executives and different creatives to do it. And he said, finally, I think he was asked to go appear somewhere or do press. And he's like, do I have the role? No one has actually told me if I've gotten this role. And it sounds like they were getting ready to like start filming, and he didn't even know if he really had the role yet, which is crazy.
Which is sort of weird how that synergizes in a funny way with Seth Meyers, what he explained about getting the Late Show. He never tried out and he never asked for it. They just gave it to him, and he just found out about it in like a way where Lorne called and said, I think you'll do great. And he's like, great at what?
That's very funny.
Yeah. So that's a weird aspect of these gigantic opportunities sometimes, apparently, is they forget to tell you that you have it.
I think the last thing that struck me was, and Caroline, you talked about the power imbalance affecting the vibe of the panel between Noah having been the boss of John recently on their project. It was interesting listening to how John Hamm and John Slattery were kept in the loop about what was going on with Mad Men during the run. And John Hamm said that at the end of every season, or before they would start the next season, Matt Weiner would have them out and they would have a 2 to 3 hour lunch, or just a discussion, drinks, food. And Matt would ask John about what he thought was going on with Don, where he was, where the business was, the relationships that Don had going, really plowing his brain for his feeling on the character, really, and really sounded kind of interactive and inclusive and very collaborative. And Slattery said, without really any kind of irony or sarcasm, he said, I would find out what was going on with my character by reading the scripts. He's like, I had no input or any kind of side knowledge. So there was definitely, the difference between Don Draper and Roger Sterling, and the difference between John Hamm and John Slattery. Definitely there was an information imbalance, it seemed.
But overall, amazing to see them. This was an amazing get. I mean, it is absolutely one of the reasons why this festival this year was as great as it was. This panel made a huge impact, I think. The last one that we had for that night was a really late night one, you guys. It started at 9:45, and that is a very, very late panel for these types of things. It was Bill Lawrence and friends. Had you guys known anything about Bill Lawrence? And tell us who the friends were.
I had been to the Scrubs reunion a couple years ago, so he was there for that. But his name is one of those that you might not immediately recognize just the name, but then when you start to hear, okay, well, Spin City, Scrubs, Cougar Town, Ted Lasso.
Yeah.
Okay, now all of a sudden you know his work.
I'm a huge fan of Bill Lawrence's work. I watched Spin City. I watched Scrubs. I want to say religiously, but I watched every episode of Scrubs more than once. Not the later seasons, so they really jumped the shark. But the first 2-3 seasons of Scrubs, maybe some of the best comedy ever put on TV of the single cam variety. I watched Cougar Town. Definitely, and obviously I love Ted Lasso. So definitely a big Bill Lawrence fan. And Garden State aside, I really like Zach Braff, and I really like Brett Goldstein. So those 3 guys, price of admission for me to get to go see them live and hear them shoot the shit, as it were. It was a interesting panel, though. Phil Dunster ended up joining the crew, and then a young lady who I don't know if we ever even got her name beyond Charlie.
Charlie Clive.
Charlie Clive, was that her last name?
Yeah.
She's a British actress, young. She's working on a project with Steve Carell and Bill Lawrence. They had been filming that day, and so Bill kind of brought her along without really telling her or giving her any kind of warning.
Yeah, it was kind of like an elaborate prank with her that they had told her she was going to dinner, and they basically like pulled up to the side like back door, and she just like was walked out onto a stage with like 1,000 people. So it was kind of mixed feelings on that. Like in one way, funny, I'm sure within their friend group, very funny. In another way, as a woman and in this whole industry stuff, I think he was probably walking a pretty fine line by bringing such a young girl out there and, making her feel put on the spot. I can leave it at that, but I definitely think that people kind of looked at each other like, what? What is this?
He paid for her hotel room, Caroline.
Yeah, he said that out loud, which again felt
not awkward at all.
A little odd
and
to mention.
She didn't know what to do with herself
on a panel. Yeah. So this was a panel that, I think the name of it, Bill Lawrence and Friends, like already kind of gives you this idea that like we had no idea what we were going to get. It was like hanging out with these guys, listening to the projects they're currently working on, getting a chance to ask questions. I do appreciate that they did like rapid fire questions and literally cleared both lines. If you had a question and you got up there, you had a chance to ask. That is the one and only panel I can say that happened in. So for that, I think that was a very cool panel for the fans.
Lots of panels had where either the building people were cueing the moderators and saying, okay, wrap her up, and then they would do so. But in this case, I think I recall the moderator saying, okay, they're giving me the go sign, and Bill Lawrence was like, nope.
Well, he said, he was like, let's just do this rapid fire.
For this. We didn't need a moderator. Yeah, but he didn't ask, though. He just said that's what we're going to do. We didn't need a moderator for this panel, and I think actually it would have... Bill ended up moderating the panel, as it were, so I think it kind of did create some weird energies, though. But and
he's used to being the boss.
I very much so, and I think he told them, okay, now Brett, you speak. Now Phil, you speak. Now Josh Hopkins was also there from Cougar Town.
He literally did. He would
just say, okay, now
next.
You go and you give an answer.
Yeah.
The one time that the moderator actually had control was at the beginning, and he skipped over Phil Dunster, and I wanted to hear how he got the job of Jamie Tart on Ted Lasso, but we didn't get to hear that because the moderator, maybe that's why Bill took it from him, because he skipped over Phil, because it bothered me, and I was sitting way in the back.
That's funny. I think Bill is accustomed to being the boss, and we all have friend groups like this where there's like the clear leader of the group.
Alpha.
Yeah, and he definitely is the clear leader of the group. These are a bunch of celebrity men, but he is by far in charge of when they get together. You can tell. Their dynamic was funny and silly. They had lots of good stories. They were telling lots of inside baseball kind of information and silliness. And I enjoyed hearing all their casting stories. I enjoyed like talking a little bit about Brett's stand-up, which was something that I've watched and is funny. I highly
stream
recommend.
on Max right now.
Yeah, go take a look, you guys.
Second best night of your life. It's he's been touring it for a while. They recorded it.
It was funny. He talks about being on Sesame Street and how that was like the best night of his life. So,
what was his? What did I see? It was like a clip where he was saying, "What would his dream Muppet project be?" And he said, "Muppet Goodfellas," with him in the Ray Liotta role, and everyone else Muppets.
I want to see Roy Kent flushing drugs down the toilet while Muppet Lorraine Bracco screeches at him from the other room.
Right.
I think the other thing, since the panel, I think I was thinking about it. One thing we didn't discuss when we were kind of doing our breakdown afterwards was at the beginning, I think Caitlin and Emily both introed this panel, because I think they mentioned that this was the latest panel that they had ever, first start time that they had ever had at ATX. And I think they mentioned Bill Lawrence. The idea of Bill Lawrence and Friends goes all the way back to their season 1, to their very first year of doing ATX, and how he had reached out and said, I'm coming, I'm going to show up there, I'm going to bring some people, I don't know who yet. And they didn't know what they were going to get. It was just the first year doing the festival, and he just kind of showed up and he brought friends with him, and it was kind of a freewheeling thing. I was thinking about that, and it struck me that maybe from Bill's point of view, he has earned the right to keep the theater open, do rapid fire, not be cut off, and direct who he wants to speak, when he wants to speak, and pay for their hotel rooms, and all of the things we saw. It was curious to me if he felt like maybe I've been here since the beginning, literally, and so I'm going to do this the way I want to do this, because no one was telling him anything other than what he wanted to do that night.
Yeah. And he kept adding people. That was probably the biggest draw to his panel for me, was that it started with him and I think it was Josh Hopkins or something.
And Zach Braff.
And then Zach added, then Brett added, then Phil added.
Right.
And it was, oh my God.
Phil that day. I think Phil was in that day. And obviously the woman, Charlie, she never even made the app. It's still, I just looked now, it still hadn't updated with her. So she was very much like, hey, you're here. Let's go. Get in the car, dummies. We're going.
It was an elaborate prank. We got it. But
was.
It was almost like hazing her, really. Which, again, mixed feelings, guys. Mixed feelings on that.
I had seen the Scrubs panel, like I mentioned, and the goof energy between Zach and Donald Faison it reminded you of their characters on Scrubs. I didn't watch a lot of Scrubs, but I do know that it was a comedy and that they were pretty much the comedic leads.
They're still doing their shtick on T-Mobile commercials.
Yeah,
They're
commercials.
Still playing this same JD and Turk kind of vibe. So
I wonder if people in the audience were unaware of Brett's background as a writer and in comedy, and in seeing no trace of Roy Kent on stage at all.
I don't know. I think that's something that people probably don't even know, that he was a writer for Ted Lasso who then got the role, or earned the role of Roy Kent. Like he auditioned without telling them, but he was a writer on that show first, and I was obviously not his first even job with Bill. It's interesting. I make you bet most people did not know that, and the fact that he has probably much more writing credits than he even does acting credits. So
I know you haven't kept up with MCU movies, Mike, but I think it was at the end of the most recent Thor movie, Brett Goldstein has a brief cameo as Hercules.
Oh no, I did. I actually did see that. Don't we see his ass? Do we see?
He's not wearing much.
Yeah, I did see that, and I thought that was very funny. I didn't think that movie was as bad as other people did, and I definitely laughed. But I had a very low bar going into it. But
yes,
but I felt like they were kind of springing him to like kind of return to that role. Maybe
I'm pulling for him because I like the guy. He was constantly smiling. Every picture I took of him, he was just smiling and making fun of Zach Braff. So it seemed like a really great presence.
Zach definitely seems comfortable in his skin of punching bag. He seems to be that role, which, he has made a career directing. And I mean, just because Scrubs went off the air, he has actually remained busy. So maybe he's confident enough that he can be the butt of jokes for things. But yeah, definitely Bill and Brett, even Phil to a little bit of extent, because I guess they're working with each other on Shrinking. I think that was one of the things that's also going on right now, which the Shrinking writers crew writing staff was actually in the audience, and Bill gave them a bunch of shout outs and actually a lot of kudos and flowers. So he really did bring everyone with him to this panel. Maybe it was a giant stretch limo and they all just poured out of it.
Bill's got a lot of friends.
I think so. It was a good panel for nighttime, I think, because it was so relaxed. It was so silly. There was a lot of like just telling stories, and like I said, they were willing to do all of the fan interaction. Whatever amount of questions were standing in those aisles, everyone got a chance to be answered. And for a lot of those people, I mean, they asked for shout outs, which is very unusual. You guys, I've never actually seen that in panels where, they asked for Bill Lawrence to like harass their boyfriend or talk to their friend or whatever, wish someone a happy birthday. And like, he totally did it. I mean, he 100% did it. So, hey, that makes for a good panel and a cool one to end the day for us for that Saturday.
Yeah, that does it for our third day of coverage for the 14th season of ATX.
Third day, another podcast that we covered years ago, a limited series with Jude Law. The third day.
Excellent callback, Michael.
Thank you.
If you like this podcast, then check out days 1, 2, and 4 coming out at about the same time as this one, and subscribe to this and every other Pod Clubhouse feed you can find. While you're at it, leave us a 5-star review and a comment. And if it's nice, we'll even read it so that other people can know what a good job we're doing and find the podcast more easily.
And if it's not nice, we will ban you and never read it.
That's accurate, yes.
Thanks for listening.
Thank you for listening. This has been an original Pod Clubhouse production. Pod Clubhouse is a podcast network dedicated to encouraging collaboration among podcasters and friends to bring a fresh voice and diverse perspective on a wide array of content. Please visit and leave a comment for us at podclubhouse.com. Rate, review, and subscribe to our podcast feeds on Apple Podcasts. Follow us on Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook. You can find us at Pod Clubhouse. Our DMs are always open, and we'd love to hear from you.